So Lisa, what did you think of the case? I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, all right. So my name is Amy Cuddy, and I'm a social psychologist. I'm in the NOM unit here, which is Negotiations, Organizations, and Markets. And it's kind of an eclectic group of behavioral scientists. So we have behavioral economists, some social psychologists, some cognitive psychologists. We all are experimentalists who look at human behavior and try to predict how it will how it will unfold from variables that we manipulate. Social psychology is really about how we influence each other's thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So it's really about the psychology of everyday life as opposed to pathological behavior. It's kind of how does the average person behave if you put them in this situation. So I look at things like stereotypes and stereotyping and the cognitive underpinnings of those. What is it about the brain that leads us to stereotype? I study nonverbal behavior. I study even how our physiology is affected by social stimuli. It changes very, very quickly. And if we're in a situation where we feel threatened, we might have a big spike in our cortisol, things like that. Today I'm going to talk about how our body actually can change our psychology. So our body language doesn't just reflect what we're thinking and feeling, but it actually informs us. So it actually tells us what to think and feel. I want to start though just by asking you to pay attention to what you're doing with your body right now. So don't tweak it, but just pay attention to how you would sort of normally by default sit in this situation. So how much are you pulling your shoulders forward or down? How much are you crossing your legs or even maybe wrapping your ankles? How much are you kind of wrapping your arms around yourself or trying to not touch the person next to you versus sprawling out, making yourself big, leaning back, feeling more open body postures. So that's the kind of thing that I look at. And I'm going to suggest in this talk that if you tweak that a little bit, even for just a couple of minutes, it really changes your psychology and your outcomes. So, most research on nonverbal behavior or body language until the last couple of years has looked at how our body language communicates information to other people. And that makes sense. It is nonverbal communication. And so it is about some kind of a discussion or something happening between people. So, we from little clips like this, and this is the kind of thing that's actually just one frame from a video, but this was the frame that was most interesting to the media, so this was the one that circulated and generated the most discussion. But from these kinds of things, we infer how much we think someone is competent, how strong we think they are, how much we like them, how trustworthy we think they are, how quickly we think they can think on their feet, all kinds of inferences about traits we are making from body language. And they are, when you're in the public eye, it can be brutal because they can just snag a frame like this, right, and analyze it to death. Here's one of my favorites, and this one probably generated months of discussion.
You're now arriving at number 10, and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, here comes the Prime Minister of it. No.
So, totally neglecting any other contextual features of what was going on there. That clip got played again and again and again and again and again, and obviously it did not serve him well. So we draw all kinds of inferences from the body language of other people, and the thing is, those inferences are predicting really meaningful outcomes that can be even life or death outcomes. They can certainly be very expensive outcomes. One of my favorite examples comes from research by Nalini Ambady, who was at Harvard. She's now at Stanford. And I actually want to say, I'm sorry that this is a total non sequitur. Nalini is an Indian woman who's in her early 40s. She is dying of leukemia, and she needs a bone marrow donor. And we are desperately trying to, she needs She needs an Asian bone marrow donor. So I'm asking anyone who's willing to submit a sample, please to do so. She has 4 to 8 weeks now, and we've been working on this campaign for a long time. Her research was at the center of the book Blink, and she's just done fantastic, just amazing stuff. And what she looks at are what she calls thin slices of behavior. So they're 30-second clips, usually 30 seconds, of interactions where, or just even a person walking, but there's no audio. So you're just watching basically the nonverbal behaviors. And I should say, people who are aphasics, who have trouble processing language, are actually better at detecting lying than people who are paying attention to the words. So nonverbals really are communicating some accurate information. So what she had people do was look at these real clips of physician-patient interactions. And she did this because lawyers were starting to say, the competent doctors are the ones getting sued. So the ones that graduated at the top of their class, they're getting sued more than the ones who graduated at the bottoms of their class. So we don't understand what's happening, but we have this experience often. So these malpractice lawyers started talking to each other at conferences and swapping these stories. And what would happen is that a client would come in and say, I want to sue my specialist. And they'd do all of the data collecting that they needed to do, and they'd come back to the client and they'd say, it wasn't your specialist's fault. It actually was your GP's fault. And they'd say, I don't care. I hate my specialist. He never listens to me. So they started thinking, wow, this has a lot more to do with the relationship between the physician and the patient than it does with the actual diagnosis. And so Nalini looked at these clips, and she had people rate them on a variety of variables. And the ones that predicted who didn't get sued, so she had all of the data on who did and didn't get sued. The ones who predicted who didn't get sued were things like empathy and warmth and connection. So basically the doctors who put their clipboards down, who looked the patient in the eye, who sat at the same level with the patient, who nodded, who sometimes even touched the patient on the shoulder, those people were dramatically less likely to be sued. And it's been replicated in a number of other studies. Those patients also feel healthier, and they actually have better health outcomes. And this is likely because they're more compliant. When they like the physician, they're much more likely to follow the physician's advice. So that's one really important outcome that you can predict from body language. This is even smaller. Alex Todorov, who is a social psychologist at Princeton, studies even thinner slices. He calls them spontaneous trait inferences. And these are the inferences that we draw automatically when we look at a face. And they're basically about assessing threat. And our brain is configured to do that. We have evolved to assess threat from facial expressions and even facial features. So what he did in the first study was he had all of his participants look at all 50 pairs of Senate candidates from one election cycle. And he found that so basically people are inferring traits in less than a second. So the face flashes up and then it's gone, and you have to rate that person on a bunch of traits. And when people are done doing this task, they say that was stupid, that I would never judge a book by its cover. I can't believe you made me do that. It predicts nothing, But the means are extremely stable. So the ratings are very stable, and they predicted 70% of the election outcomes, and they even predicted the margin of victory. So that was one study, done very, very well. He's a fantastic researcher, but he almost couldn't believe it. He's replicated it now with many different kinds of races in the US and overseas. So in less than 1 second, people are making these inferences. So our body language clearly, demonstrably communicates information to other people, whether or not it's accurate. And from that information, people are behaving in a way that's consistent with those inferences. But I started to think about watching the body language of the students in my class. So the way that I got into this work was, I study power, this sort of the psychology of power, and also body language. And I'm watching my classes. I taught in the RC, and now I teach in the EC. And we have had this gender grade gap problem that I am very concerned about as a sexism researcher, and a young woman in a place like this. And I'm watching, and I'm noticing that the people who participate either less, or their comments are shorter, or the quality of them seems a little lower. are basically sitting in ways that are different from the people who are participating a lot. So I start thinking about whether it's possible that I could sort of tweak their body language and have that cause them to feel different. So I was, particularly my research has focused on two dimensions. Do I trust this person? And that's really the first assessment that we draw about people. And that answers questions like how warm, empathic, kind, friendly, compassionate, caring is someone. And the second one is, do I respect this person? And that's really about power, strength, competence, skill, determination, confidence, ambition. So I'm going to focus on the second right now. So what does powerful body language look like, first of all? It looks across the animal kingdom pretty much like this. It's about expanding and making yourself as big as you can. So it's about occupying space as well. So you're expanding, making yourself big, and you're even sometimes trying to occupy other individuals' space. So this is true for all primates, but it's also true for non-primate animals. Who do this, in order to signal their dominance and their power. Here's a nice example. And it's obvious, don't know what happened there. It's also true for humans, and this one is, Oprah is probably, I would say, the best example of a woman who is able to consistently communicate power through her body language in a very comfortable way. And I think, when people have power, they do this much more naturally and comfortably. So that's the first piece. People also do it explicitly and, sort of intentionally to show that they have power. So the top one, you might recognize that this guy is LBJ, and this is what became known as the Johnson treatment. And what he did, what I like about this one is that, he is a big guy, and he really used his, he was very aware of interactions and interpersonal space. And he used this both to seduce and to intimidate people. So that closeness made people feel closer to him and also felt more intimidated by him. So what I like about this one is that he's in this big room, but he's right in that person's space, right? So he is occupying somebody else's space. You see it all the time on the campaign trail. You see people using that kind of language to make themselves look strong. So using power posing is used to signal dominance that you already have or that you're trying to express. It also happens in the moment when you feel powerful suddenly. And let me explain this a little bit. When you win a competition, you feel extremely powerful. You have a rush of hormones that makes you feel very, very dominant. And when people win a competition, they naturally and without thought do this. So they put their arms in a V, they lift their chin slightly, and they smile slightly. This is a great one for, I love the guy on the side who looks a little bit perplexed by it. Because there are cross-cultural differences in how people express power in front of other people. Here's an example that we're probably all pretty familiar with now. And you can see between 2008 and 2012 how he became more aware of his body language and this is from 2008. In 2012, you see lots of interviews of him talking about how he does this intentionally in advance to intimidate other people. But this is, what's interesting about this particular expression of power, which people call pride, it's really about winning a competition, is that it is so hardwired that even congenitally blind people do it. So there are some great photos. The woman who studies this is named Jessica Tracy, and she has studied this all over the world. She's got great pairs of photos of people in different kinds of sports competitions. One of them is sighted and the other is congenitally blind, and they are doing exactly the same thing when they win. So that's how hardwired these expressions of power are. I don't know what happened to the slides, I'm sorry, I've used these pictures many times, but something funny happened there. So when people feel powerless, and animals, they do exactly the opposite. They're sort of trying to make themselves invisible. So they make themselves small. So they're making themselves invisible and also protecting themselves from predators. And that's really what's happening. They hunch their shoulders. It's also showing some anxiety. When you become anxious, what you see happening, if you watch somebody walking, and there's a great demo called, and I encourage you to look this up, called the Walker demo. It's data across hundreds and hundreds of subjects where they had them just walking, and they now have put together this, they used motion capture, so they had sensors attached to them, and they just show these points of light. it's a person walking, and you can change this person on dimensions like relaxed versus nervous. And you can see what happens to the body as someone becomes nervous or relaxed. And the main thing that happens when you become nervous is that your shoulders rise and they move forward. So, and your steps become much smaller, so your movements become faster. Sort of like if you think about the biggest mammals move the most slowly, and the little ones move very quickly. So it's sort of, or think about something like a hummingbird and how fast a hummingbird moves. So when you see a big animal moving quickly, it usually signals that it's feeling threatened or nervous or something. So people do the same thing when they're despairing, feeling powerless. They wrap themselves up, and it really is. People will ask me, and I'll just say about this one. This is not powerless because you're not wrapping yourself. And also the shoulders can still be back when you do this. So I don't think that this is a little closed. So it's not a particularly warm pose, but it's not a powerless pose. You see the same thing in animals and humans. Often watch her body language. I really see a lot of it. If you ever see people at a town hall meeting that's televised and they're walking up to the mic and they're about to speak, they often are doing this. They hold their arm because they're feeling really scared and powerless. These are just, I think, really interesting images because, I mean, first of all, this is sort of her typical pose. This is not her typical pose at all. There's a new Vogue cover now that has her looking very powerful, and I need to get a picture of that. But the one on the right is interesting to me because actors, artists, photographers are very aware of this body language, and even if they can't quite explicitly sort of articulate what it is. But this one I think is interesting because what my understanding from talking to some people who were working with her at this time was that she did not like this picture and that there were many, many photos taken. And this wasn't a pose that felt comfortable to her or natural to her, but you have this, Michelle Obama, the first lady the world's been waiting for. She's in pink. It's a very softened, feminized, I think, version of Michelle Obama. And this is what happens when you put high power and low power together. This is, I think this is, it's not extreme, but I think this is a low power pose. All right, so looking at these poses, thinking about, is it possible that I could get people to change their body language? Because what I was seeing when people walk into the classroom, and many of you might remember this, it's hard to describe to people who have never spent time here, but is that they'll walk in, and the students are on time, so they're here early, and they're standing, a lot of them are standing right here talking about like what they did over the weekend, or they're kind of already taking space. They're making themselves taller, they're stretching out. Then you see some people who are already sitting with their phones like this, and or looking at the case, even if they've read it a million times. These are not necessarily the least prepared people who are the ones sitting at their desks. They're scared. So I already, before class starts, I see all of this posturing going on. And then when class begins, you see more of it. You see some guys, and usually, honestly, they're the ones who sit in the second and third rows here. I sort of always know that those guys, who are almost always guys, are going to be the toughest ones to deal with. And I have consultants come in who work with them each individually on their body language. And those guys always end up, they always say, man, that guy was an alpha, but we broke him down, And so after they leave, those students behave so much better. It's really amazing. But so you see some guys like sprawled out with an arm over the chair next to them, and they raise their hand like this, which is both powerful and also sort of like, I don't really care. It's rude. And that's what these guys tell them. They're like, you really come across as rude. But then I see women, and not just women, a lot of international students as well, who raise their hands like this. They're like cradling, their hand says, I'm so sorry for bothering you, And so, obviously, and I don't want to ignore the fact that some of what happens in participation is that you don't see those people as much, right? You see that these people are much more visually salient, but that's not the only thing. Especially, I pay extremely close attention to any possible biases in participation. So I track it very, very carefully, and I don't think that's what's going on, at least in my classroom. So I'm thinking about what happens if you change how they sit. Now, this general situation of speaking in class, being cold called, is really about social evaluation anxiety. And it's the fear that you don't belong. That's what's sort of happening. I have so many students, not just women, come to me and say, I feel like an imposter here. I don't feel like I belong here. I'm going to be found out. I'm different from everyone else. I'm having a different bad experience. Other people are happy and I'm not happy. It's just, so yesterday, and I had 7 students come in after my class, and 2 of them cried, and a third told me how horrible his experience has been. He's an international student. He said, I'm really, really high on empathy. I'm really sensitive, and I feel like it's really a weakness. And I'm like, no, 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 this is a really good thing. But the first one who came in was seems cool, sort of distant, and she's French, and she said, look, I wasn't raised in a place where I can be effusive easily. It's just not natural for me to be like, I had a great day. So she said, for me, it was just the first year was horrible because I didn't get it. Like, I didn't get the social stuff, and people were not nice to me. And she said, I actually got sick. I was in the hospital for 5 weeks. And she said, and I was so glad to have 5 weeks away from it. And I thought, wow, that's, heartbreaking. And so, the best thing that I can tell them is you can't imagine how many other people feel the way you feel. And that alone, it's not good news, but it's a relief to them, right? And we're paying attention and we care. And we do. I mean, we're really paying attention to these cultural issues that are going on for people and leading to that first year being so miserable. So they develop even worse imposter syndrome and social evaluation anxiety than they might normally have. But we all have this. It's anytime you're in a job interview, giving a pitch, giving a public speech, any of those situations are filled with social evaluation anxiety. We're so social, we are so naturally wanting approval of others that the worst situation to be in is with people who are more powerful who might reject you. So, and it leaves you feeling just utterly powerless. So just a quick review, we know that power, whether it's chronic or displayed or momentary, leads people to power pose. I don't recommend that get up, but it is a really good, this is our best power pose. But the question was, does this lead to power, does power posing lead to power? And the way I was thinking about it originally was, can you fake it till you make it? That was the phrase that kept going through my head, can you fake it till you make it? And I want to return to revisit that because my thinking about that has evolved since then. So really the question is, does our body language communicate information not only to others but also to ourselves? There are 2 kind of lines of research that led me to think that this was possible. The first is on what's called facial feedback. So we've always known that emotion is expressed on the face. So when you're in a good mood or you're feeling happy, it makes you smile. William James, the amazing Harvard psychologist who, has not been with us for a long time, but the psych building here is called William James Hall, had just so many amazing ideas, and he was the first one to say, I think it also informs us and changes our emotions, but wasn't able to test it. In the 80s, people started looking at this and found that smiling does put you in a good mood. So when you force people to smile, now here's the catch. If you smile just with your mouth, you are not going to experience this benefit. You have to smile with these muscles around your eyes. And so that's called a Duchenne smile. It's a real smile. This kind of smile is not a real smile. It doesn't make you feel good and it doesn't make other people feel good. A real smile you can even hear on the phone. Like if have you ever talked to somebody, and maybe you're talking to somebody at Orbitz, and you're frustrated, but if you hear them smile, it actually kind of makes you smile. It really warms people up. So it warms you up and it warms other people up as well. The other was, going back to primates, we are primates, so I find drawing from this literature is pretty informative. But when you think about alphas, our natural assumption, and the assumption of most primatologists and anthropologists, was that alphas were born alphas, right? So they're the ones who were born with whatever the genetic profile is to become the alpha. And hormonally, that profile is high testosterone and low cortisol. And let me just say a word about testosterone and cortisol. Testosterone is linked not only to dominance, it's also linked to risk tolerance and fearlessness and resilience, ability to get back in again, and desire to compete. So people who are experiencing higher testosterone are more likely to want to compete. They actually enjoy it. But that's not the only thing that is linked to power. The other one that matters is cortisol. People used to think it was just testosterone, high testosterone, powerful, dominant. But if you have a high testosterone leader who also has high cortisol, what you have is a really dominant person who's easily threatened. And that is not the person that you want to work for. So this is a person who is very stress reactive. We all have probably worked for this person, right? This is the person who's paranoid and vigilant and, and doesn't deal well in crises. Like they might come across as very, very strong and dominant when things are going well, but when the status quo is threatened, these are people that you don't really want to have in power. So that low cortisol is really important to sustainability, to sustaining a position of power. So these alphas in primate hierarchies are the ones with this profile. We just thought for many, many, many decades that that's the way they were born. Then primatologists in the last decade or so started noticing something really interesting. And that was that if a primate, and primates, alphas often lose their position quickly. It can happen because they're in a fight and they lose, or there are lots of situations that lead an alpha to be, dethroned very quickly. Within a few days, that individual's testosterone has gone down and his cortisol has gone up. But even more interestingly, that new alpha, who suddenly becomes alpha, within 3 days, his testosterone has gone up and his cortisol has gone down. And when you get pushed, when you have low testosterone and high cortisol, you're much less disease resistant. So you're more likely to get picked off. And then people say, well, it's survival of the fittest and that's all it's about. But these hormones change very, very quickly. They change on a dime. They change in a matter of seconds and they fluctuate dramatically over the day. This is not, by the way, moderated by gender. We find the same effects in all our studies for both women and men. So I'm not going to, if we post the slides, I'll leave this one up. I think I'm not going to go into greater detail about testosterone and cortisol. I'm going to go into the experiments. So this is what we did. We had students come into the lab and we had them take on 2 high or low power poses for a total of 2 minutes. So basically they come in and we take a little saliva sample to get their baseline hormone levels. We always do it in the afternoon when those hormones are relatively low and not changing as quickly, because we want to be conservative. By the way, cortisol is highest in the morning because it wakes you up. It actually gets you going. So if you feel that kind of spike in the morning, that's sort of your system getting you going. It's kind of like this little alarm clock. So we bring them in, get this baseline level. We tell them that we're looking at sort of the effective body poses on a variety of different things. And we don't show them pictures of the poses because we don't simply want to prime the concept of power. We actually want to see if power is embodied. So is it so familiar, is this so old that it's actually become sort of an embodied concept? So we describe to them these 2 poses, and I'm going to show you 5 of each because we've done a bunch of different poses. So here are some of the high power poses that we've used. And, they're not super dramatic. I mean, the first one is, I think, but these are not. I have to say, these guys who were so kind to volunteer to do this and knew that their pictures would be shown all over the place. This guy smiles so much, I had to be like, you have to stop smiling for these pictures. But they did not, when I put them in the low power poses, they did not like it at all. So these are the low power poses. So you can be seated or standing, but you're looking down, you see the shoulders are sort of pulled forward, you're wrapping, and actually this one on the left, we've modified a little bit because if you're crossing the heart, that can be comforting. So it's better if you have your arms sort of a little bit lower, where you're crossing the torso. I mean, it's not good. I mean, if you're manipulating low power poses, that's a little bit better. Sorry. And then this one, which is probably the least dramatic looking, we get the strongest effects on. And I'll tell you why. It's because she's covering her throat. And that really means you're feeling threatened. And I want to point this one out because this is a real issue for women because they tend to play with their jewelry. And they actually wear it sometimes in order, I mean, you don't think about it, but sometimes people wear sort of short necklaces so that they have something to fidget with, but it ends up causing you to be in this pose. So just something to be aware of. You're less likely to see men do this than women. So quickly, just the design, come in, take a saliva sample, they do these poses, and we take a couple of measures that are related to the psychology of power, such as risk-taking. Are you more likely to take risks? And then just some explicit measures of power, how powerful and in control do you feel? And then some implicit measures, which are things like, we'll give them an incomplete word. So it might be, space OWER. And we tell them to complete the word. And it's a bunch of words that are power related. And you can complete them either as a power word or as a non-power word. So if you're in the low power condition, you complete that word tower. If you're in the high power condition, you complete it power. So we're looking at that implicit priming of power as well. And then we take the time to sample 15 minutes later, or you come in and you do the low power poses. These are the effects on risk tolerance. We've replicated these many times, and they're almost always just about the same. In the high power condition, now this is not, this makes them look like they're super risk seeking. It's not a very big gamble. It's for a few dollars. So, but we get 80 to 90% of people in the high power condition gambling for more money. So this is just an opportunity to win a couple more dollars. And only 50 to 60% of the low power posers are willing to take that gamble. This is the testosterone change, and this is huge. So this is about 20% to 25% increase in testosterone in that high power pose condition, and a 15 to 20% decrease. So these are massive. I mean, when you think about just a few percentage points in your testosterone changing, as men age, for example, and those lead to behavioral differences, think about this kind of thing, even if it's just brief. And then we get exactly the same on cortisol, but in the opposite direction, and the effect sizes are very, very similar. And again, we've replicated this, and the effect sizes stay about the same.
With women and men.
Women and men, right. Now women obviously have lower basal testosterone, but that doesn't, I want to be clear that that's not the only thing that goes into good leadership, right? And it really is relative to your own baseline level. That's how your behavior is changing as a result of those changes relative to your own baseline. So we published this first study, and it was, I think, my first or second year here. So I had been out of grad school just a couple of years, and my collaborator, Dana Carney, had also only been out a couple of years. She was at Columbia Business School at the time, and we were really not media savvy. So we publish it, and it just gets tons of media attention. And it was like 2010, 2009. It leaked out a little bit earlier than when it was published, and people were really focused on joblessness and job interviews. And so people would interview us, and they would end up saying, and we didn't give this advice, but we didn't think to tell them this is not the advice we're giving. The advice they would give at the end was, so Carney and Cuddy would suggest that at your next job interview, you go in a big power pose, and it was so, we were kind of horrified because, we also study interactions, and we would never advise anyone to do this. I mean, these are cowboy poses, and what we really were thinking was, these are people sitting in a room alone, and it's changing their behavior after they do it. So we were thinking about what people do before they go in. And when you think about it, this is what people are doing before they go into a job interview. They're making themselves small. And even now more than ever, they're looking at their phones. We just finished a study. We're writing it up right now. We compared behavior. We had people work for 10 minutes on an iPhone, an iPad, a MacBook, or an iMac, so increasingly bigger and more spread out. The bigger the device, the more powerful they felt, and the more likely they were to stand up for themselves. So basically the experimenter says, hey, I'll be back in 5 minutes, and doesn't come back. And we measure the time it takes for them to go interrupt. And the people who were working on the desktop are like, they go out almost immediately. They're like, hey, I'm waiting in here. And the people who had worked on the iPhone just sit there. And we get a floor effect with them because they never end up going out. So anyway, so that does affect your behavior. so this is, you're nervous, you're crossing yourself. You're also paying attention not to how you want to present yourself, but what you want to say. You're like, I got to make sure I say all these things. And that's the last thing really that you should be focusing on. At that point, you should know what you want to say, basically. You should not be over-scripting it. You should be thinking about how you want to say it and what frame of mind you want to be in when you get there. Because you can't control the questions that are going to be asked anyway. You've got to be able to feel comfortable and confident when you walk in. So we're saying it's about preparatory power posing. It's not about being dominant over other people. It's really about feeling powerful, I want to re-own the word empowerment, but that really is what it's about. Unfortunately, that word has become sort of hackneyed and cheapened through a lot of, I think, bad pop psychology, but this is about personal power and empowerment. So when you think about, we think about, well, why would that affect, in what way would it affect people's performance in a job interview? There are two possibilities. It could either lead them to say smarter things, like to have better answers, right? To be more cognitively clear, to come across as sort of, basically more competent in a very narrow definition. And there's reason to think that that could happen from the power literature. But we thought it would be something actually that's more about nonverbal presence. So it's not about what you say, but it's about how you say it. And these are the variables that we measured in the study that I'm about to show you. We also measured a bunch that were about competence and sort of how well structured was your speech and things like that. So we have people come in this experiment, and we tell them you're going to be interviewing for your dream job. It is your dream job. It has to be a real job that exists in the world. And you have to write a 5-minute speech. You're going to deliver it to 2 job interviewers who will be grading you as you go. You're also going to be recorded, and then that video will be graded as well. And you have to speak for the entire 5 minutes, and you have 5 minutes to write the speech. So we have them do the power posing for a couple of minutes before they do this, or the low power posing. That's really stressful already. I mean, most people are terrified of public speaking, and you're speaking to 2 people that you don't know. You didn't expect this to happen, and then you're also being recorded. But here's what really makes it terrible. The evaluators are trained to look at you like this. And this is actually, although you will probably almost all see this as negative, that's a neutral facial expression. So that's very little muscle engagement in the face. And but it's seen as extremely negative, especially by Westerners, especially by Americans. And this paradigm, it turns out, is called the Trier social stress test. We stole it from the clinical psych literature. So it had been used by clinical psychologists just to increase cortisol. They have sort of discovered it to be the best way to increase cortisol in an ethical way in the lab. So we were like, well, this is sort of a job interview, So and getting no nonverbal, they're not only just looking at them like that, but for the entire time, they don't nod, shake their head, they don't lean forward, no changes at all. And so that for 5 minutes doesn't sound like a long time. It feels like an eternity. And Marianne LaFrance, who is a psychologist at Yale, has a great new book called Lip Service on Smiling. She says that having someone respond to you that way feels like standing in social quicksand. You're like sinking and grasping at straw. You're doing anything to get out of there. So what happens, and I just want to say first, because people will ask us, well, maybe if you power posed for a couple minutes, you continued to do it while you were in the actual job interview. They didn't. There was absolutely no difference in the extent to which they expanded their bodies in the interview. But what we had 4 people very well trained. It took them a year to code these videos. They were blind to the hypothesis and to the condition. So they had no idea what condition the person was in. They didn't see the posing. All they saw was that job interview. So they graded them on all of those presence variables, a bunch of variables related to intelligence and competence, and then finally an overall evaluation, and should we hire this person? Much, much higher ratings for the high power posers, dramatically higher ratings on both evaluation and higher, much lower for the low power posers. And then we look, though, at what's the mechanism. Do they come across as smarter, or do they come across better in some other way? And it was fully mediated through that presence variable. Now, this maps onto a study done by a local grad student. It's not published yet, but she looked at 185 venture capital pitches. They were real VC pitches, and people had already passed the bar on some measure of the quality of the idea. So all of these pitches were, decent ideas. But she wanted to see what determined who got the capital and who didn't. And she looked at many different variables, and the only significant predictors were enthusiasm and lack of awkwardness. So enthusiasm, confidence, and lack of awkwardness. So it was all about how they presented the idea. When you think about it, people are investing in a person, not just an idea, and your comfort and enthusiasm in sharing the idea is to some extent probably signaling something about the quality of the idea. Probably. I'm not saying always, but probably. So that's pretty much what we were finding. So just briefly, so what we know so far is that if you do this for 2 minutes, you get this change in testosterone and cortisol. You're more likely to take risks. You're more fearless, and you're more likely to get the job, right? So that's where we were at this point. And I think that this is pretty good news because it's a small change that people can make to experience this big benefit. We even ended up about a month and a half ago in Dilbert. Somebody sent this to me. They called it corporate yoga. So, but I'm thinking about this, and what we know so far is that our bodies change our minds change our behavior, and our behavior changes our outcomes. So you can fake it till you make it. But when I talk to people about this, some people came to me and said, I don't really want to fake it till I make it, because that sort of suggests that you get there and then you go back to feeling like an imposter again. So you're there, but you're still feeling like I might be kicked out at any moment. And I don't want to feel like that. I want to change in a lasting, sustainable way. I really want to feel more powerful every day. And I don't want to necessarily have to do this before every meeting, And so I'm thinking about this, and it resonated with me because I had had a long period of imposter syndrome, and I sort of had forgotten about it, which I think is a good thing. But it really reminded me, as these, especially female students, were coming to me telling me this. I don't want to be a fake. I really want to be this. I was thinking about this story. So when I was in college, so I was in my second year of college. I was in this is high school graduation, but when I was in college, I was in a really bad car accident. I was thrown out of the car, and I had a very serious traumatic brain injury. And I woke up in a brain injury rehab ward. I had been withdrawn from college. I was in the hospital for a long time, and I was obviously pretty confused. And they did all kinds of neuropsych and cognitive testing, and the news came back that my IQ had dropped 30 points. That's 2 standard deviations. And I was smart. I mean, that mattered to me a lot. And the funny thing was that it wasn't until it was taken away that I realized how much I cared about it, that it was pretty much at the core of my identity. I mean, I think that, and being a generous person, wanting to do something good. If somebody had said, it turns out you're not nice anymore, that would have been probably equally devastating. But they said, the doctor said, gently, you're really probably not going to finish college, so you need to figure out something else to do. And I was, just totally crushed. And I spent the first year crushed. And then I'm pretty resilient, and it didn't take that part away. So I just kept, I was not wealthy. I went to a state school, and I paid for college. I worked actually as a roller skating waitress, which sometimes gets conflated with the head injury story, but they're unrelated. So I didn't have a lot of access to expert care, but I read everything that I could read about head injuries, about rehab. This was in the early 90s. We still don't know a lot about closed head injuries, because what's happening is these layers of your brain are shaking at different speeds, and all of these connections between them are being torn. So it is this diffuse injury, and it just looks different for every person. Some people really don't recover, some people do, but they're more likely to be conservative and say you're not likely to recover. Anyway, it took me 4 extra years to finish college. So my high school friends graduated 4 years before me, and I felt the whole time like an imposter. I felt like I was the only reason I was making it was because I was studying so much harder, and I was terrified of being called on or having to do anything public. So then, miraculously, my advisor takes me. So I went to the University of Colorado. I ended up going to Princeton for grad school, which was terrifying. And my advisor really took a crapshoot on me. I mean, I think that she took me because I was extremely ambitious and very focused and hardworking. And, our interests were aligned, and I was willing to do just about anything. I worked around the clock. And I still felt like a horrible imposter at Princeton. It was even worse for me there. Tomorrow I'm actually going to give the keynote at the reunion talk to the psych department, which is nice. Because I was so, everyone knew how terrified I was of public speaking. So at the end of my first year, and I kept saying to myself, pretty much every day, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. Everyone else is smarter. I'm going to be found out. So at the end of my first year, I have to give a talk, and it's just a 20-minute talk to the people in your unit. So it's only just like 20 social psychologists and grad students. And I was so afraid of giving this. I thought, this is social evaluation anxiety. I was so terrified that I would be found out that I called my advisor. And my advisor was Susan Fisk, who's a great sexism researcher and was the first social psychologist to testify in a Supreme Court case on gender discrimination, which was Ann Hopkins versus Price Waterhouse. So she really wanted to support women. I call her, I'm like, I really thought about this and I'm gonna quit because I just, I really think it's against my best interest to do, like it's just too hard on my body to actually have to give this talk. And she was like, no. There was no even entertaining it for a minute. She said, you are going to go in and you're gonna fake it. And I don't care if it's painful and if it's an out-of-body experience, you're gonna do it. And it's gonna be okay. It may not be the greatest talk, but it's gonna be good enough. You've got the data, it's gonna be good enough. And you're gonna keep on doing that, and you'll give every talk that you get asked to do. She said, I don't care if it's the local Girl Scouts, you're giving the talk. And you're gonna keep on doing that. And someday, you're gonna look back and realize that you're not saying, I'm not supposed to be here anymore. So I did, and it was horribly stressful, and I didn't feel relief afterwards. I felt like I wanted to collapse and die, but I did it. And sorry, I'll go through that one quickly. And I basically got through that, and I ended up going to Kellogg, and I still felt that a little bit. And then I got to Harvard. I taught at Kellogg for 2 years. I got to Harvard, and this is, you get to Harvard Business School, and people say, oh my God, these students are sharks. Like if they smell blood in the water, they're gonna come in for the kill. Are you sure you wanna do this to yourself? And lots of people gave me the advice to basically fake it, but in the wrong way, to come across as cold and stern. And I was like, that's just not who I am, and that's not gonna work. And I decided instead to go in and sort of trust the students. And several people said, don't tell them it's your first time teaching here. And I'm like, I think in 2008, they're gonna figure it out. Like there's this thing called Google. And so I went in and I said, look, I know a lot of things. I don't know everything. This is my first time teaching here. I trust that we're gonna get along and give each other feedback. And that first year, I really enjoyed so much. And at the end of the semester, it was like class 18 out of 20. I emailed the 3 or 4 students who really hadn't talked, and there was one who had not spoken at all. And I said, you have got to talk, and if you don't, you're gonna fail. You will have to fail. And so she comes in, and all of them wanted to meet with me, and most of them were like, I was in Cancun, and right, it was things like that, and I was really, things like that. But actually the first day, my first cold call, I decided to start with a cold call, and the student had not read the case. And my question was just, who are the protagonists? And she's like, And I'm like, oh God, this is gonna be a nightmare. So anyway, this student comes into my office, this last one, and she looks like she's gonna collapse. And she immediately, tears are just streaming down her face. And she had not planned this. I don't think she knew. I think she was going to come in and just get some advice. And she just sort of collapses and says, I'm not supposed to be here. And she explained that she was born when her parents were in high school, and she was from this small town in West Virginia, and she didn't have a fancy pedigree, and she didn't fit in, and if she talked, she was going to blow her cover. And I said, if you got in here with that background, you definitely deserve to be here, right? You know, there was nothing, there was no legacy that got you in, there was no money that like you got here because you deserve to be here. So you do. I said, I am 100% certain that you deserve to be here. And so I said, you're gonna, you know, so she said that a couple of times, and I realized that was the same mantra that I had said to myself over and over, that I wasn't saying it anymore, and I knew that she could get to a point where she didn't. So I basically gave her the same lecture that my advisor gave me, which was, you're gonna fake it, and I don't care if you're scared, but you're gonna make the best, you know. And so she spoke the next day, and heads turned, like people had not even noticed her, and it was amazing. And I've stayed in close touch with her. She's now doing exactly what she wants to be doing very well. She is a different person. It's unbelievable. Her experience here did not turn out, she never socially enjoyed it. She felt like an outsider, but she really was able to completely embrace this feeling of power and competence. It was really kind of a remarkable change. And I realized that, you know, I had gotten to that point as well. I'm going to skip that part, I'm sorry, because we only have a brief amount of time left. But what I realized was that you aren't faking it till you make it. When you do this, you actually are becoming it. You are becoming the self that you want to be. I think we think of ourselves as having one single possible self. And if we do something that's not consistent with the self we are now, that's inauthentic. And I think that's totally wrong. I think if the self that you are now is not the self you want to be, if you're not able to bring your enthusiasm and love and passion to these situations, then why would you not strive to be, you know, a stronger self? You deserve to be a stronger self. So I do think that you actually fake it till you become it. Just want to say, don't forget that other trait, that warmth, which elicits trust, that leaders really do have to connect before they lead, because trust is the conduit of influence. So you have to build rapport with people, because if you don't, there's no medium for your ideas to travel through. I mean, you're basically throwing them up against a brick wall. So I don't want to neglect that part. The ability to project both strength and warmth is believed to be so rare that the ancient Greeks called it the divine gift. So being able to do both of those things is, and Machiavelli 500 years ago said, do you want to be loved or feared? Because you can't be both. I think that's wrong. I think you absolutely can. But I just want to sort of remind you of that other trait. I don't think that they're at odds. You simply can't connect unless you feel strong and authentic. So these things are actually totally linked to each other. So if you feel that you belong there, you are much better able to connect with people. So if you feel powerless, you're not going to come across as warm. You have to feel powerful in order to come across as warm and in order to connect with people. So it's not overpowering others. It's about mastering personal power and gumption and resilience and that aspect of strength. So last thing, just to think about this, you'll hear other things like this when you're reading, you know, about psychology in the news, but these tiny tweaks can lead to massive changes. So just give you one other example. A woman that we just hired who will start this coming year has done a bunch of studies showing that if you tell people who are anxious to say to themselves, I'm excited, all of a sudden their performance gets much better. So simply reinterpreting high arousal emotions improves your performance. She's looked at speaking, singing, she's had them sing, and she's had them do math tests. So in a variety of domains, just reinterpreting arousal that you think is anxiety as excitement leads to better outcomes. Maya Angelou turned 85 yesterday, and this is one of my favorites. Stand up straight and realize who you are, that you tower over your circumstances. And I'll end on this. Okay. Kristen.
I had a job interview about 5 or 6 years ago where the guy came in and sat down in the chair. He's a Harvard Business with grad, put his feet up on the table.
Oh my! Wait,
What are you doing?
You were interviewing him?
What's that?
You were
I was being interviewed.
That's horrible.
I was like, are you kidding me?
That's horrible.
Yeah.
One thing I have to leave in about 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I've got a hard stop, but. One of the things just about the power in the actual interactions, people tend to do, in most interactions, people mirror each other non-verbally. They do what the other person is doing. In interactions, though, where there's a stark power differential, people do the opposite, and they call it complementing. So the high power person tends to become even more powerful. Sorry, I think we've heard enough of that. You get the idea. But and the low power person tends to make themselves smaller. The problem with that, if you're the high power person, say, is that you're not, again, back to this idea of presence. You want to get the most out of this person. You don't want to dominate and intimidate them. You want to bring their best out. You want to see what is this person capable of. So just to be aware of, with your own behavior, that, maybe moving away from the desk and sitting at chairs or things like something that makes people feel a little bit more. Ruth.
How long does it take for the effect of the power pose to decay? Because I'm wondering if I do it an hour before I go.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And so here's what we think. It's hard to do that in the lab because you can't. It's so artificial to keep somebody there without interacting with other people. So what we think happens, and what we're doing is. We're trying to do this through sort of pushing messages to people on their phones and telling them to pose and taking a bunch of measures. It's hard to get those saliva samples, but what we think happens is that it becomes self-reinforcing in the same way that facial feedback does. So you start feeling more powerful, you behave in a way that's more powerful, and people start responding to you as if you are more powerful. So we think that it becomes self-reinforcing and reinforcing through interactions, but we would like to look at that, yes?
I find that I am becoming more powerful, more grounded, not putting my feet on a table, but doing yoga, meditation,
absolutely.
Because then I'm really into the
total
integration of, so it's not like this, it's really like becoming more.
Yeah, so yoga, I would say I get more email from yoga instructors than anyone.
Grounded and compassionate.
No, it's true, and so about 80% of,
really powerful.
yeah, about.
Yoga, when I'm not, I'm like terrible.
But I think but yoga poses they aren't, well, some of them, I mean, warrior pose, some of them are, but about 80% would be classified as high power poses, and the 20% that aren't are the ones that are more comforting. So they don't tend to be ones where you're pulling your shoulders in. So we think, yoga I think is great. It's just that you can't do yoga every morning or before every stressful meeting. Marla?
Very tactical question.
Yeah.
A lot of times we find ourselves sitting in executive meetings where the tables are open.
Yeah.
So it's, how do you sit?
You mean, I think, so here's the thing. Just because of skeletal differences, it is much more comfortable for women to cross their legs than it is for men. And for some women, depending on your waist-hip ratio, and it's really uncomfortable to not sit with your legs crossed. I think legs crossed is fine. What is not good is ankles wrapped, which a lot of people do. Anything that's basically engaging too many of the muscles, but also, leaning forward is better than leaning back. What I hear from a lot of women, if they're leading a meeting or something, because they can't be sitting like this, is they'll actually use a prop, like a chair or a table or a whiteboard, and they'll rest their arm on it, and it forces them to open up, which I thought was really clever, because it doesn't look dominant, overly dominant, it's comfortable. Barbara?
Hands on the table instead of underneath.
Definitely hands on the table. Yeah, and similarly, if you have, okay, I'm sorry, I've got a 10:45 appointment, but if you have a chair that has arms on it, put your arms on the chair. It forces you to not do this or any of these things, or playing with your hair, all of these things that we do that end up making us seem powerless. I'm so sorry, I love this group and I would love to talk more.